Call this work session to order. We'll start with introductions. Fred, are you sitting over here? Okay. Mr. Gates?
Dean Gates, Assembly Council.
Forrest Dunbar?
Pete Peterson. Felix Rivera.
Very good. Okay, so we are going to discuss these. This is our first work session, right? We have two ordinances put on the table by Mr. Constant and Mr. Croft to discuss changing the way we apportion our districts. And I believe we're going to start with a presentation by Mr. Gates. Mr. Gates, do you want to take it away?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't plan a long presentation or anything, just a little basics about the reapportionment process and pieces of the reapportionment puzzle, and not just the map pieces, but the charter and code and state law pieces. So here's our current Assembly District map. I zoomed in so you can see the table here. So the goal of apportionment and district boundaries is to have a fair and effective representation among everybody. So you have a target population that's basically based on the U.S. Census, the Decennial Census, and our target population in Anchorage for 11 members is for each of them to represent about the first row 26,530 people from the 2010 census numbers. And so we had a contractor back in 2011 do this map. I was the counsel in the Department of Law who did this project back then, the reapportionment. And so I learned a little bit about it, worked with the contractor and the Assembly members, the committee for reapportionment, and this is where we ended up. There were five proposals at that time with different map layouts. Some of them rotated single-member district, which one of these ordinances before us wants to do. So here's our current map. This is in section 225.10. The ordinances that are proposed are at the new section 225.20. We've got each district and how many members they represent. This whole chapter is just one section of those districts in the map. So where do these come from and how do we get there is, excuse me, I thought that would be larger. Let me see. So our charter section 401 talks about apportionment and when we must reapportion. So we've got instructions from our charter founders about when to reapportion. And whoops. Let me see. All right. Starts there, the assembly portion, whenever it's malapportioned. You determine malapportionment by doing population counts, and the decennial census is the best way to do that. But we have done this, I think the municipality has done this 5 or 6 times, and sometimes, I think in the mid-'80s, they used the Department of Economic and Community Development in their population estimates. So we this amended in 2006. And it changed some language, and this is where we are now. It eliminated number 2 that was here, so that's why we just have it orphaned to number 1. But it says that the Assembly shall determine reapportionment after the state adopts its final districting plan and constitution. And I thought it would just be helpful in the conversation to pull up that adoption of reapportionment plan.
Wait, I'm sorry, Dean. What did Section 2 say that they amended out?
The charter was amended by the voters by an initiative petition, by ordinance in 2006. It changed the section by deleting subsection 2. It might seem odd that we have a number 1, but not a number 2.
What did subsection 2 say?
I need to pull that up to remember, but it talks about, I don't want to guess at it, but I can pull that up for the end of the meeting and then number 2 said. All right. So our charter refers to the Constitution, and here it's Article 6. Section 3 of our Constitution. It instructs the state, which is the District Board, which is 5 members, to reapportion following official reporting the decennial census of the United States, which was going to be done in 2020. So the state will adopt soon after that, after we have new population numbers. They need, and it may take a year or so. And many of you have probably seen this or observed the process in media in the past. And they have this whole process and finally adopt, and then maybe subject to challenges as it was in 2012. And actually, each time they do it, I think there's usually a court challenge. So it could take a little time before you have a final one. But our charter says once that's done, if we're apportioned, we have to do that within 2 months after that adoption. So we're probably looking at in 2021, sometime after that adoption, to make a finding of whether the current boundaries are malapportioned or not. Even if we're not malapportioned, nothing prevents the Assembly from deciding to redistrict. So, and that's the basic legal framework, I think, that we're in terms of reapportionment, and give you an idea of what will happen and when it will happen.
Is that the end of your presentation?
That's all I wanted to share with you. And if you have any questions for me, otherwise I'll turn it over.
Note for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Croft, Mr. Dyson, Mr. Trainee, and Ms. Quinn Davidson. Any questions for Dean? Mr. Weddleton.
So what are the rules for setting the boundaries of reinforcement? We could totally overthrow what we have. It would be 6 vertical lines. Is there...
Well, the rules are basically that they need to be, I'm sorry, could you turn the lights off again? We have the rules right here. Election districts have to be compact and contiguous territory containing nearly as practicable a relatively integrated socio-economic area. There's a lot of case law about what that language means.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I actually have a fair amount of experience in this. I did research that was used in a lawsuit that successfully changed the district maps to what we have right now. And if you remember the state district maps, and if you remember what the state did in 2010, they made the screwiest maps we could imagine, and they got sued over it, and many times, and they had to change the lines several times. So this idea of relatively integrated socioeconomic areas is much more difficult to define than you might imagine. Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I've done this exact thing twice. We've been malapportioned, we've changed our boundaries. We get a computer program we use from the planning department. What it does, it gives us plus or minus standard deviation on every assembly district. And you've got to move lines among the precincts to make sure you have a standard deviation the state and the fed will accept.
Can you go back to the district map, Dean?
Sure.
I have a question. So this notch here is East Anchorage. It's very similar in socioeconomics to the rest of Northeast. How could this, under our law, be attached to Chugach and Peters Creek, where they have large single-family homes and
Mr. Chairman,
very different?
Let me tell you, I was here when we did it. It was the only way we could get the votes to allow Eagle Chugach to have 2 representatives. We had to take part of Muldoon and put it into that area. Otherwise, we had a problem trying to figure out enough people to live in Eagle Chugach to have 2 representation.
So why weren't
they
you forced?
represent that area.
Why weren't you forced by the law at the time to rotate the single-member district out to Eagle River
Because you're
Chugach?
not required by federal law to rotate the single member district. Okay?
But I mean, this seems like a pretty clear violation of the code.
And move it.
Yeah. So did you guys get sued over this?
No, we did not get sued. And that was years ago.
We do need to draw the lines. I think the first primary concern is making sure we don't have too much deviation from the target population representation. And we
Well,
have
you
to
can
draw
see.
the lines in
Yeah,
the
right.
population.
Even with this being taken out of the Eagle River Chugach, we have the largest deviation. We have the most people, and they have the fewest of the 2-member districts.
It is a political process in many ways, and as I mentioned, in 2012 we had 5 different map proposals. We didn't have this little I guess, appendage, I think they called it back then. So, throughout that process, and as debate about where it should be, you move a proposal, you end up with some, and none of them are going to be maybe please everyone.
Yeah. Ms. Quinn-Davis.
This might be a little off topic, but maybe we can circle back to it. One of the challenges that I've noticed is that the community council lines don't line up to these districts. So, for instance, I and Eric have a third of the Tucker, Campbell, and Midtown districts. Why is that? Has there been any effort to align those?
There's never been an effort to align community councils to actually assembly districts.
Why?
Some of us have 10 community council meetings every month.
Right, but that's not my point. So why aren't they
Tucker
lined up?
Campbell actually has 6 assembly members who represent part of that district.
Excuse me.
I understand
Very rarely
that.
they ever show up.
But so, okay, but I'm asking why that those lines weren't, why wasn't the community council taken into account?
Because community councils by city charter are only advisory to the citizens bankers, not part of city government. They're an advisory, not-for-profit organization.
Okay.
That's why.
I think Dean,
If I may, the community council boundaries are determined by completely different considerations, right? It's a group of residents and business owners in the area that decide they want to form. The boundaries are formed in dialogue with the planning department. Assembly district boundaries, there's a goal by resolution that was passed years ago to try to align assembly district boundaries with voting percent boundaries, so that you don't have a district boundary that bisects a percent. And so that was actually one reason why some of these lines were drawn the way they were, to follow percent boundaries. You get problems with voter confusion if you've got a percent that's split by an assembly district line. Everyone going to the same voting place, but some voting for one assembly district and some voting for another.
and I guess, just a follow-up, that
Yeah.
I guess that, it'd be really convenient for us if the assembly districts lined up with the community council boundaries, but state senators and representatives might feel the same way. So it's probably more complicated, but I'm just curious. But thanks.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you. Is it possible, could we get this emailed to us so that we could actually see this?
Sure, absolutely. It's in our online code. I can email you the link to this code section.
Email all of the links, like the Constitution and
Okay.
Sure, I
Rivera.
can put this all together if you like. Different codes that
Thank you,
show me
Mr.
the
Chair.
tabs up here.
So I'm wondering if on the city level, if they had to go through and do research on a lot of the same things that I did when I worked on the state level. So I had to look at the types of jobs in a district, in an area, the different types of industries employed, the access to different types of services, and the list goes on and on of the types of different factors that I had to do research on to really get a sense of whether this was truly a compact socioeconomic area. Is that research available for the city level? Is that done?
Well, with a grain of salt, I would say probably not. And there was some case law from the mid-'80s that says Anchorage as a whole is pretty much one big socially economic integrated area. So we've got diversity and so forth, but we don't have, certain areas. It's more mixed, I guess, throughout the whole of Anchorage Bowl. I guess we've got Eagle River and Chikiak and Goodwood, but their populations don't have to be split up in ways. They're all going to be part of one district, and because they have to be contiguous, they're going to be part of a district that touches Anchorage. There's not really some way to split up Goodwood into different parts, so you've got that already connected to South Anchorage. I hope that makes sense. I don't think you'd have to go through the same level of research you did at the state.
Do we have to, I know that another part of the state level analysis is complying with the Voting Rights Act, right? And majority, minority service and that kind of thing. Do we have to do any of that sort of stuff?
the Voting Rights Act, part of it was overruled by the Supreme Court several years ago by a case out of
Shelby.
Alabama. It just overruled the pre-clearance requirement.
Right.
So we don't have to get approval from the Department of Justice before we do anything to the map anymore like we used to. But
Oh, we did,
otherwise,
we used to?
still,
The city used to?
yeah. Yeah, I think until 2013, when that case came down, if we changed Title 28, just a code amendment, or change the map, we make our decision, then we have to send it to the Department of Justice and wait for them to either approve the change and find that it wasn't discriminatory,
Yeah.
wouldn't have a discriminatory result on minority voters, stuff like that.
Do we have any majority districts? Is yours actually?
Well, I mean, by opinion, obviously many of you say you do, but by law, that case I mentioned in the mid-'80s, as we don't. So, and we don't have that. The Voting Rights Act required certain jurisdictions that it listed to have an effort to have language accessibility for minorities, whether it was I don't have the right terminology in front of me, but to make sure that there was language accessibility for those certain areas.
Yeah.
We don't have that for Anchorage, but the rest of Alaska did have that. But that part is gone now. We don't have that preclearance requirement.
Mr. Dyson, then Mr. Trainee.
I think Mr. Trainee had maybe a follow-on question.
Just the last time we did this, what we did was on District 4, which is my area, we took a little portion of ours on 15th and 20th, East Ridge, and moved it into the downtown area. Because our area had grown and theirs hadn't. So to make the numbers match out, we moved a little portion from our subdivision into downtown. It was the area of 20th, East 20th and 15th Street, East Ridge. We moved them over. So we have moved the boundaries periodically.
Sure.
This whole we needed to make sure it matches up.
Fair,
Yeah.
fair dude?
I'm sorry,
it's not.
this whole section.
There you go, back up there.
I got you.
Yeah, this is another one that doesn't go to any community councils in the district, nor that one. So effectively, I have 7 community councils.
Oh yeah, what is that? Oh, so that's no, that's not airport. That's this is Airport Heights. This is like that mostly
Like the
that
hospital.
It's the trailer park.
trailer park.
Yeah.
P.
Penland
Penland Park. Yeah, that is.
Yep. And so that adds 2 more community councils to my 5, so that's 7. in the downtown.
Right, because they are part of Airport Heights Community Council.
I don't think they
On
are.
the park. They don't come to.
Not, no.
They don't come to Russian
But
Jack.
East Ridge is.
I wonder where Penland Park is attached to. Midtown, no?
Midtown
No.
is East Ridge, or Midtown is
Maybe it goes to Russian Jack.
Airport
I'm not
Heights.
sure. I don't think they go to Airport.
I don't think they go to Russian Jack because the border to Russian Jack is Burgaw.
Right.
This is Burgaw right here. So I don't know. They're kind of in a no man's land.
and you can tell when you walk through.
Absolutely. John?
So that's good background, when we have 2 ordinances in front of us that talk about these, and I'd be interested in, say, like Crofts, aware of this requirement to move it, how do you mechanically do that? Is all of a sudden, what if you juggle in one and now all of a sudden two vampire in the same district, who gets to stay? You run into those problems, and how do you make this work? Rotate.
Yeah, do we want to, why don't we turn the lights on and have a presentation from each of the sponsors of the ordinance? I apologize.
I'd like to follow up with my question.
Go ahead, Fred.
Before we do. Just kind of a general philosophical thing. We ought to all be wary of trying too hard to make the structure make us function well. And it's always well intended, but there's often unintended consequences. And I'm delighted with working with you all because there's a remarkable amount of teamwork and people not pushing for special things for their district. And I think most of us have demonstrated a disproportionate sympathy for solving problems in Chris's district. And I think that's neat. And of course, we all see it as kind of the center of the city, but it also happens to be a center of the social problems quite a bit. So I think on a practical level, it's working fairly well because of the goodwill of folks here. A couple other things that are interesting. I observed 30 years ago that there's correlation between low-cost rentals and non-owner occupied properties and social problems. You know, that's not cause and effect, but the correlation is profoundly true. When people don't own the property, they're there for a relatively short period of time, they just naturally don't care. And the other thing to recognize is Chris's district pays a just hugely disproportionate amount of the property taxes. We're all subsidized by the money that comes in from property taxes on these very, very expensive pieces of property. And I don't know how we figure that in, but Chris's district subsidizes the rest of us, you know, in lots of ways. And that's worth thinking about. And, you know, and I've been here a long time, but I've seen, watched, observed the center of Anchorage just kind of keeps moving south. You know, we used to think of Midtown as being on the outer edges, and so on and so forth. Now, the several groups that I'm involved in, all those turkeys live in South Anchorage, and they want me to go all the way to Diamond or something for a meeting. You know? And it's the demographics have just shifted those ways. So, yeah, those are things to know about and think about as we try to do what we hope is the right thing.
Yeah, Mr. Constant.
Thanks. I follow on that, Mr. Dyson. And there's another variable that's in there that is pretty shocking when you look closely, is that the mill rates as they're set, and I don't ever get the language exactly right, but my neighbors in Fairview, who suffer from some pretty bad degradation and disinvestment, are taxed at the exact same rate as my neighbors in South Addition, but not at the rate they are in Mountain View. And so I have one particular neighborhood who is not only overtaxed with social services and overtaxed from a citywide perspective, but in the very specific case, they're overtaxed for the exact services that they don't receive.
Yeah.
It's like layers of it. And in fact, I do have someone here from Fairview Community Council to speak when the time is proper.
Okay. Well, Mr. Train, can we let's get a presentation from the let's do what Mr. Wellington suggests and actually talk about the ordinances themselves. Mr. Croft, you want to present yours first?
Yeah. Okay. Did you have something on that?
Don't worry, I'll get into it later.
I bet you
realize
will.
I'm not chairman, he is.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. The genesis of this was thinking about the major difference we have in our structure, which is most of us represent have two representatives for very large districts, and Mr. Constant for that, Mr. Flynn have one for one that's half the size. And I, in the legislature, represented Spenard and Fairview and South Addition, and I'm familiar with those areas, and they're very, very different, Spenard to South Addition to Fairview, and was familiar with the dramatic differences in what they wanted me to do and what they needed, and then midway through my term, it was about equally split. We district, and my district moved substantially south, so it was Spenard and Midtown with a different mix of needs, and not South Addition of Fairview. So understand and have been thinking some about the sense that Fairview had then and has now, that this current structure disadvantages it. That when Turnagain wants a thing, there are two members to advocate for it, and when Fairview wants a thing, there is one member to advocate for that. My personal sense is that is overblown in the sense of you have half the size. You have one member who's solely concerned with just your stuff, where our two members we have to spread around for Turnagain and Spenard and Sand Lake. and other portions of things. So I don't know that it's a straight up disadvantage, but I do know that it is a sense that some or even many in the single member district have, that they are, while very adequately represented by Mr. Constant, the system themselves is not doing them a favor. It seems to me that, whether true, and you can make an argument that it is an actual disadvantage to them, I guess you could make an argument that it's an advantage in some areas, but more importantly, that sense is important. The sense in politics sometimes is as important as the actual reality of things, and that there is no particular reason why we should do what we have done for the past 3 apportionments, which is keep the single member in the same place. That it would make sense for us as a city to move it around and spread that benefit, detriment, or sense of detriment, whatever combination of things it is, to other areas and let them experience it. And for another area of town to have a concentrated district with only one and see how they like it. It would also give the citizens of Fairview the chance to say either, yes, this is what we've been saying for 30 years, or we kind of liked it when we had Chris's ear and his alone, and a single member may not have been as bad as we want. But whatever mix of reality and perception, it should not stick in this way forever. And I don't think it was intended. There's been some mention to me that it was mentioned in our charter discussions that it would rotate around the city. I haven't found that, and I'll do some more research to try and find it. It doesn't really matter whether they said it or not, but it would be kind of interesting if in the discussions they said, and we intend this to move around. It's not binding on us, but so I'll see if I can find it. But whether it is or not, it seems that it should be. And that we shouldn't hardwire this into downtown and Fairview, Mountain View, South Edition, having this either benefit or detriment. So the answer to your practicalities of it, it would be a switch from prior practice. Because we've hardwired this in this way with 5 big districts, double member districts, and 1 single, we have over the last 30 years essentially just had to move little boundaries. Now that can still have the problem you're talking about, Mr. Weddleton. I live on the edge of the northern edge of my district, and in legislative apportionments, there are times where they put 2 people in one, and that creates an open seat. It is a little trickier for us because, right, the entire house is up every time, so you can just say, well, you 2 are in the same district now, and there's an open one, and that just is how it went. Because we're staggered, it creates some more complexity for us. But it just seemed to me that there is a fundamental sense of citywide fairness that we shouldn't have it be the same single member district all the time. And so I didn't say in this where it has to go. I didn't say
Who first?
right, anything. Simply you can't put the same geographic area more than 10 years in a single member. And I don't know where where it ended up. And I don't know whether the place it lands says, oh, this is great for us. We're compact and this is a neat area and we want to keep it, or not. But I think so that fundamental sense of citywide fairness. And that's why they're just.
Thank you, Eric. Dick, did you have a question?
The last person tried to do this was named Dan Sullivan. Tried to break 11 single member districts.
It's not what I'm trying to do.
That's the next one.
That's for him. The other issue is, I've served on the light for a while. The best person I worked with downtown was Alan Cheshire. He never complained or whined about the size of his district. He fought like a tooth and nail. Believe me, if something was coming in front of the body he didn't like, he thought they would be disadvantaged. He got other semi-members to join with him, and that was defeated. I remember we would deal with the issue of where city buildings should be located at. Alan fought tenaciously to make sure we broke the ordinance so city buildings are downtown. And the other problem, you're going to have truncated terms. If you move that single member district around, you're going to have somebody that's elected for 2 people for a specific term, that if that is moved, their term will be truncated. So how do you deal with truncation of terms? That's the problem. If you want to do this, I'd rather send the voters on the voters decide rather than something like this kind of a decision. The other problem is they got Fred Dyson, they would sure get. If you carve his area in the single member district, because right now dual member districts have twice the population of the single member district. Where are you going to build? Where are you going to start at Peters Creek and move a line up? That would only leave you with one, two got Peters Creek, maybe one representation. Then you got to take more of Muldoon to make up for the difference. So you've got the same exact size. If you put the single member district there, and then you've got the dual member district, how are you going to drive the boundaries? The reason we've got this, we've kept it because it works. It does work for this city. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I mean, I think those comments have more to do with the next ordinance we're going to talk about. But let's see. So I think Mr. Weddleton and Ms. Quinn Davidson. Oh, and Suzanne. Go ahead, John.
You know, I didn't really give a huge amount of thought. As I said, it was an issue for many years. It finally seems to be working. And I think one drawback of this, unless we saw how it would change, I don't see how anyone would really support the idea. What's strong over there? And it seems to me I've seen something some time ago in some of the tribes before. But you know, since I've been on this now, I agree with Mr. Dyson that you know, I come down to downtown prior to being on this island frequently. Of course, we're all down here every day and a half, you know, now. But so I go downtown, you know, there's just shows from the beach, et cetera, and so on. I even go to Fairview, go to other places. They seem to go on there. But I don't go to Muldoon, I go to Eagle River, Gage, you know, some other parts of town. So really, downtown gets a lot of attention. We understand because it's really about you understand your district. When we vote, it's for the whole city. It's not just our district. And I understand my district fairly well now, but I also do downtown. Not as well as Chris does, but far more than the rest of the district. And in Midtown, I know Spenard is doing business there, but I don't know Kearney, the other parts of that district that well. So I think, though this seems unfair, it does work well. I think like Fred said, you can focus a lot on that.
Rightly.
Eric, when would the clock on 10 years start running? Would it start running when the ordinance is passed, or would it be retrospective so we'd have to immediately reapportion? Because it's been in cursive for 20, 30 years.
I meant it, and I think it says when the next census happens, we reorganize, and we would not be able to put those sections that are in the single member now in the single member again.
So it'd be probably 2020 or 2021.
Yeah, I mean, the 2020 is the census, but you don't reorganize typically, until the 2021.
Okay. Miss Quinn Davidson and Mr. France.
So a couple things, Eric, when it rotates, so you're not suggesting changing any lines or anything, so you still have a population of 26,000 represented by 2 people, and then a population of 50-some thousand represented by 1 person.
No.
Yes.
He's nodding his head yes, so.
You can't do that.
What? Yeah, that would violate one person, one vote kind of thing.
No, it's exactly what we have now. We could have a 26,000 here and a 52 there.
No, that's not what she just said.
What did you just
So
say?
you're suggesting changing the lines of where the district, so right now, Chris's district has 26,000 people, right?
Right.
And ours has 50-some thousand. So if we were to rotate as the 1 member district, would say it's me, because you're out of here, would I still have 50-some thousand people, and then 2 people would represent the 26,000?
No, okay, I'm sorry, then I did misunderstand you. No, we would redraw the lines, and there would be a
Okay.
single member here and
Got it.
doubles.
So the lines would be redrawn every 10 years?
They are redrawn every 10 years. They are redrawn all the time. We just have made relatively incremental changes, and this would be a larger change. Though there's nothing stopping us from making a relatively large change now. And if population had shifted, which it hasn't really so dramatically as to justify it, we might have a very different map next time. Even if you retain downtown as a single member district, these might look radically different.
Can I do that?
Yeah, do it.
So, thanks, Morris. I'm a little torn because I kind of like the idea of Chris's proposal, which we haven't heard enough about yet, but because it makes it more permanent, and I feel like the disruption of changing all the lines every 10 years to the public might make people even less interested in voting. If they don't know who the representative is and it's always changing, and I thought I had 2 and now I have 1. And so I'm concerned about that, I guess. And I don't know if you have thoughts or...
Well, most people would have 2 as they do now, and would still have 2 as they do now. There would be a change, and just responding to what both of you said, Mr. Weddleton and you, Austin, it's very nice to say, I think it works, but they don't, right? The people who are in it, it's nice of you to represent a double member district and say, I think you're doing fine, thank you very much. What I hear from those, and they're Mr. Constant's constituents, but a lot of friends that live there and people I've represented in the past say, that's why we have all the social services. That's why Beans is there. Because we know we have fighters. We've had Flynn and Teshi and Constant, and all of them were fighters. But the deck is stacked against them, and that's why we get screwed. And I don't know if they're right, but I do know that there's something wrong with doing that forever. And it was said, well, you've got to show me a map first. I think that's entirely opposite. We should establish a general principle of fairness and then figure out how it applies, and it could apply in all kinds of different ways. I wasn't going to write you a map to say, here's what it's going to look like, nor should I. That's a different process, and different people, like Mr. Rivera, smarter than I on those issues. But we should say, this can't stay forever. We can't mean that they have to be single member essentially till the end. In fact, we must establish, in my opinion, the opposite rule, which is we are not going to relegate any particular section of town to this status, which many of them feel is a second-class status.
Yeah, go ahead, guys.
So why, and I know we haven't heard from Mr. Constant, so maybe you'll be better prepared to answer that afterward, but why is your proposal better than his?
Good, well, we'll get to his. Let me just briefly say, I do think, I like having us as a team, right? I like having coverage for Sand Lake or whatever when I can't make it. I'm not going to be able to make it for a while.
You're going to be there next
Oh, I see. Yeah, so I think that system works well. It also makes sense to me to have an odd number, not just odd members, but an odd number of members in the both in the assembly. So I get the rough structure that they presented us with, that they settled on with the charter. I think it makes sense. And so I like most of us being double members and dividing up that way. It also makes that division easier. You know, if you think you represent a lot of community councils now, wait till it's all single member and we'll get to it. But so I generally like the structure. I just don't like the unfairness of relegating one area to that one till the end of time.
Suzanne?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, Ms. Davidson's question addressed my same concerns about the mechanics of it and the possibility of disenfranchising people by changing boundaries, especially since the assembly boundaries don't match up to community council boundaries, as you point out. So I'm good for that.
Thank you. Mr. Gates?
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that these two ordinances, they're not competing proposals. They can both be passed and exist together in code. So I consulted the principal attorney when Pearson, we drafted these so that it could work that way. For example, Mr. Constant says to change all districts to single member districts. It has a new section 225.15. Mr. Crofts is a new section 225.20. First sentence says unless they're all represented by a single member, then you have to do this. If they're all represented by single members, Mr. Crofts will be in code and will be harmless. It won't do anything. But if they're not all single members, his will be there. So it's only if Mr. Constance passes we have to go to single member districts, but they're not necessarily competing ordinances. They're different.
Thank you, Dean. And Mr. Dyson, Mr. Peterson, Mr. France.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate both Mr. Croft's arguments and his proposed solutions. My first thought was that didn't make sense. But making it for 10 years reduces a lot of the chaos. But as I understand it, we'd be 50 or 60 years out before we'd gone completely around each area having a one representative.
That's not how it works.
Well, I wasn't, that's interesting, but I was, can I respond just real quickly? You couldn't do it two redistrictings in a row.
Right.
So you could, I guess, have it be downtown, somewhere else, downtown, somewhere else.
Okay.
But-
Yeah, so I won't be parochial and say make us last. But that's, yeah, it's a attractive solution. Another one would be to think about making a 3-member district, you know, and expand the downtown area to the area around it are the most similar. And certainly that would perhaps counterbalance things the other way and have some. And just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean I'm not right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So before we get to more, I do want to give Chris a chance, because we only have 15 minutes left, give him a chance to at least present his. Yeah. And then we'll go with Mr. Peterson and Ms. France.
Thank you. So at the core of the effort that I'm working on, my neighbors have long been asking for a solution that balances equitably the representation in the city. That having one is never the same as having two. And there's no universe in which you can make 2 equal 1. It just doesn't happen. And so even though if you're at the federal level looking down with a microscope, it's all fair because Anchorage is one unified district and there's no legal distinction between minority and majority districts. The fact is, when you come close enough to Anchorage, you see clearly how it's divided. It doesn't take long. Anchorage celebrates that it's the most diverse district in America, but no, it's not. My district contains the most diverse district in America, it's the census tract. But Anchorage is in fact divided, clearly. You go to South Anchorage, you see a different Anchorage than you do in North Anchorage. You go to North Anchorage, you see a different perspective than you do in Middle North Anchorage. And so, one does never equal 2. But really, what we're doing now is sparking a conversation. I have had discussions with Mr. Croft that the intent is not to pass this thing at our next meeting, but is in fact to set this out some months ahead and really have a broad conversation with the community on this topic. Because the fact is, this should go to the community councils. This should go broadly and roundly to as many people as we can get involved in the conversation. Because the conversation is coming that we will be realigning and reapportioning. And so now begins the conversation with the community that we're changing things, change is coming, and be prepared and pay attention. And so any argument that we're not following the process and really working hard to be in front of it falls apart. We're here now, 2 years in advance. And so I love to hear that I'm whining and complaining, but I fight really hard for my neighborhood, and the fact is I could use some help, but I think that shifting the district to someone else, to someone else, to someone else does cause a decennial disruption of a very substantial matter, like the scale, that we're going to be foisting on the community a big, big change. You no longer have 2, you have 1, and that's going to be the 50,000 people or 60,000 or 70, depending on how we grow over time, where we could come up with a system that just generally works unless there's some major migrations of people across the city from now into the future. And so while I understand and would agree in if there were no other alternative that moving the single member district is the right action, I would offer that one person having one representative equally across every part of the city is the fairest approach that we can take to making this city equitable for all of its people. And so that is essentially what it does. We haven't sat down and drawn any maps as to where the lines would go, but we would set out into the future the path that we would basically all have equal sized districts, plus or minus 700 people or 200 people or 1 or 3 people, but that you too would have the benefit of having a single member representative district. And so I look forward to this conversation across the community over the next couple of months. And I'm really grateful that we're all here convened on this topic, because I have neighbors who have long been begging for this and who asked for the audio recordings of the charter sessions that say we will rotate, which I have come to conclude they do not exist, because I've had very smart people, historic people looking and have never come up with anything. And so we are at an opportune time to rebalance our system in a way that makes it work here for all of our citizens. And I look forward to working that process with you and not pushing the problem that I have experienced onto you, because that's what's gonna happen if we rotate this district, but instead, we could make a fairer, more equitable city.
So I think we had Mr. Peterson and Ms. LaFrance, and Dick and John. Go ahead.
Thanks. So, I don't know if somebody already mentioned this today and I missed it, but I don't know if anyone knows the answer to this, but have we always had 2-member districts with 5 2-member districts and 1 1-member district? Or did we at one point in time have 11 1-member districts and it got changed somehow? Do you know that, Dick?
Since the charter went into effect, we've had this configuration.
But Mr. Flynn passed a charter amendment that allows for the single-member district to occur. Previously, the charter had read, if you go to single-member districts, all terms become 2-year terms. And so the voters changed that section of the charter to read only single-member districts can maintain their 3-year terms. And so the voters have already engaged in this question, and that was in the last 6 years, I believe. It wasn't so long ago.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For Mr. Gates, actually. So, do I understand correctly that we would not just add a second member to Chris's district and have, we need to be a vote, a charter vote, and we wouldn't want to do that because then we have an even body, or is this not correct?
You're not required to have a charter change for that, and you can do this by code. The charter doesn't prevent you from having rotating single district, but you can't just add someone to current District 1 because then you have 2 people representing 26,000 people, which isn't fair and equal and so forth. You will need to redraw the boundaries, and you can do that by ordinance and amending the map that's in code right now.
Right, and I understand that we would have to redraw the boundaries. I'm just wondering if we could redraw the boundaries, make each district a 2-member district, and leave it at that, and then I guess the chair would be the tiebreaker.
For the mayor.
The mayor.
For the mayor. The mayor.
At this time.
Right now.
Mr. Calsey?
Well, I was just going to add a little bit of chaos. Since I'm no longer the attorney, I'll let the other folks dive into the charter amendment and answer some of the historical questions. But having read a lot of the charter minutes, if this is a conversation you're looking to have over the next few months, I'll say there's a ton of talk about this in the Charter Commission minutes. And they had another wild idea, which hasn't come up here, which is to have perhaps three-member districts and then some at-large assembly members. So you would have a weird overlay where, so everyone had the same number of assembly members, but you would elect some people like school board members that are just representing the entirety of the town. So lots of ways to craft it.
I think Mr. Gates, you want to answer Ms. LaFrance's question?
I was just going to add to Mr. Foss's statement. I was going to mention a similar thing, having assembly districts, each with 2 and 1 at-large member. But when I didn't get that from the Charter Commission meeting minutes, I think you read them more than I did, perhaps. But I got that idea from, I think, the Healy area. They have that as set up like that. I read that in case they have 4 districts and then 1 at-large member.
Sorry, I think Dick was in the queue.
Thank you. Dean, would you look into the issue of truncation of terms in conjunction with this? Because I'm concerned that some terms be truncated. Look at the federal impact on truncation, what we have to do to address that. The other thing was, the reason we went to 3-member districts, because there was something written somewhere that if we go to 2-year terms, we then have to do partisan. Right now, we do 3-year nonpartisan terms. And we've always been, I don't want somebody to break into partisanship. There are some parties who would like us to serve 2-year terms, but partisan. The nice thing we have about this structure, for 3-year nonpartisan terms. I like the ability to work with everybody regardless of what they are, where they come from. I just don't want to see it break into that 2-year term. If that's out there, fine for me, James. I think I've got it somewhere to pay for it.
John and then Chris.
Well, always outdone by Mr. Fozzie. I thought it was clever thinking we should have 5 2-member districts and 1 large city. But I think that's untrue. You should consider that. There's always somebody who wants to be mayor. That gets them away to citywide exposure. It has some natural churning of who's in the seat.
And I would just add, from a structural perspective, that these are 2 proposals, that another proposal could come forward and would be welcome as this conversation is shot across the city so that we can have the best, most rich conversation possible. And so please consider if that is what is interesting to you, because it would be welcome to the conversation. I just did mine because this is what my neighbors have asked for. Eric did his, and I followed him because I saw it coming and I better get on board. And so I thank you, Eric, for leading on this. And I would like to hear from Harry Need if we can.
Yeah, Mr. Need, could you speak, please?
Thank you. Just want to echo Chris's appreciation. I'm glad that this topic has finally made it to this body in this manner, especially. My name is Harry Need. I am the immediate past president of the Fairview Community Council. This has been a topic that we've been discussing for a long time. In my term with the Fairview Community Council, with Flynn, and now with Constant, we have had fighters, and before that with Pesci. Some of the research we've done, I found Pesci's autograph on. So this has been an ongoing debate for a long time. I think that one of the things I've heard here is firmly establishing two values, one being fairness, thank you, Mr. Croft, and the other being equity, thank you, Mr. Constant. And I think that as we go forward, just establishing those as the parameters from which we make a decision, I think are very important. Right now, I don't think the current situation is either fair or equitable for my neighbors and myself. I think we end up with a system where our only majority-minority district is relegated to a single member systemically. I think that is a problem that this body needs to fix. These are the same neighborhoods that were redlined. And it's not just the social services, Mr. Dyson. It's also just walk from my house to the Fairview Elementary School, and I'll show you rolled curbs with sidewalks abutting the street that are the snow storage. That doesn't happen in other neighborhoods. I have children that walk in the dark in the street to get to elementary school because we have underrepresentation, we have poor design on our sidewalks. It's not just the social services. And so this is something that is fixable, that ought to be fixed. And I apologize for those who may feel as though there's some sense of loss to their district by this proposed change. But I can assure you that as long as we have champions like Pesci and Flynn and Constant in each of your districts, there will be no loss. But what I'm asking is for that fairness and for that equity to be applied by this body. So thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Need. I think we're almost done here. So my understanding from both the people proposing this is that the intention is to delay the vote, to not take a vote on Tuesday night. Was that correct? Mr. Constance nodding yes. Mr. Croft?
Yeah, I'm not going to push it to a vote, and I'd like to get back in the queue real quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I walked on the street because of snow today with my dog and my son to West. So it does happen to other places. It happened to me this morning. But it really doesn't matter to me whether, this is either unfair or it isn't. But the citizens of that district who it's been done to feel as though it is. If it's not unfair, if it's really fine, well then share it around. If it's not so bad, you take a turn. And if it is unfair, but the worst idea is this: if it is really unfair, and it has been unfair for 30 years, then it's really tragic that we don't rotate, right? If their feeling is more than a feeling, but it's accurate, then how do we justify not?
10 seconds.
So, yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I agree with all of that, and if it is unfair, it's unfair to move it to someone else.
So we're going to end here, and then Eric, I'm going to turn the gavel over to you because I think I have food poisoning. I got to go. I feel like crap. But I'm going to say I passed a note to Dean to start on an ordinance that I'm going to write that will ask the voters in 2020, because I don't think we've had the necessary process to get this ready by 2019. And 2020 makes sense because that's also right before we actually have to do this. Ask them in 2020 to expand the assembly to 12 members and give the mayor a tie-breaking vote. The even odd thing, the legislature, the state house is even, the state senate is even. I don't think even by itself is a deal breaker. I also think we all recognize that it's a hell of a lot of work to be on the assembly. And one more assembly member to share that burden a little bit, I don't think is a bad idea. It would give the mayor more power. but it would also force him to stay at all the meetings and actually actively vote occasionally, which he hasn't done in 4 years. So I think, to me, that seems like the most equitable solution, because I agree with Mr. Constant that rotating this sort of moves the injustice elsewhere. But I also am not very comfortable with yours, because I really like the two-member system. I like working with Pete. I like having a backup. I mean, there's a reason that Senate and House districts overlap. Most people are represented by at least two, at least two people at the state level too. So that if you don't get along with one, you have somebody else to turn to.
And some community councils, as you've heard today, have 6 people who come to them, and that's not including all of the House and Senate people that represent them as well. Whereas this district that I represent, they have 1
But
and 1 only.
I like the idea of taking our time on this and doing kind of a road show where we could take all 3 proposals and show them to different community councils and see kind of which of them gets the most traction. And my intention would be to do the ballot initiative. It would take, I believe, it would take a ballot initiative to give that structural change to the mayor. We have until 2020 to do it. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like that idea. Chris and Forrest and I were talking about that before the meeting. I think there's a lot of value that you articulated. So we then, if the voters were to pass it, because it takes a charter amendment to allow the mayor to vote, then we would redraw the districts to
We redraw it so that every district
the same
would be a
Wait
2-member district.
until the state did their realignment, so that we're all in line. That puts us at 2021. It's perfect timing.
Yeah, if we could get the permission in 2020, then we see what the state does in 2021, and then we probably our first vote would be 2022. Actually, it's the first assembly vote, because 2021 is a mayoral. So 2022 would be the first time we'd have 2-member districts.
Well, except that it may be like with the change of the election date to October proposal that was made, that it can't take effect, I don't know, until some years forward, so you're not voting someone else out or you in. That gets to Dick's question of truncation of terms and how that would legally work. It could very well be that this kind of a change has to be 3 years from the day of the vote.
Maybe, although my understanding is that when they do the little changes, that hasn't led to any issues where it couldn't take effect, has it? Dick?
Fortunately, I was going to ask you where you're going with yours.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, if you give the mayor the vote on the soundbite, that gives him double the weight on anything he does, because he also has veto power.
Yeah.
So he could vote against something and then make sure it didn't get the right veto.
But I mean, practically,
So he may want to take veto authority away from him.
I don't think I would do that. I mean, it would be more. Well, I know, but it would be more analogous to right now. The lieutenant governor casts a tie-breaking vote, I believe, in the legislature. No, he doesn't. But the vice president does in the U.S. Senate, and the president has veto power. You'd be vesting that in the same person. Practically speaking, the American vice president is absorbed into the person of the president.
If I might just, I think this will add one fourth competing proposal, and that would be the 5 double-member districts and a 1 at-large. Why?
Well, because then
For the January 15th meeting.
No, for this broad conversation we're moving forward to the community to shop out what's important to them.
okay.
Just
Well,
to give a nice picture of cards.
this work session is closed.
Where's the public comment?
I'm sorry, we don't have time
You
to do
just
this
broke
today.
state law.
No,
You
you
ran
didn't.
the clock, you did it.
On work sessions, you don't have to have
Reasonable
public
opportunity.
comment.
Sessions don't
You don't
include
even,
the comment.
you set this up, of all issues.